Welcome to the Regenaissance Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Griggs. Visit www.theregenaissance.co to learn more. Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Griggs. I'm the host of the Regenaissance Podcast. Today, alongside me is J.R. Burdick from Nourishing Family Farm. Thank you for joining me.
Hey, great to be here, Ryan.
So I've been definitely looking forward to this for a while, and I know we've had some technical difficulties and whatnot, so it's glad to finally have this. So I guess to get started, to just love to hear your backstory. And did you grow up on a farm?
Yeah, yep. I am. I don't know. Our family's been farming since just about Adam and Eve in the garden. It seems like we can go back on both sides of my family, quite a few generations. Uh, my my great grandfather Burdick and my dad's uh, mom's father were both farmers in the same small town, and that's where my grandparents met. And they farmed. And my dad was the oldest of his family and the oldest grandson, so he didn't really have a chance to go back to the family farm because everybody else was already there. But he started out on his own and became a victim of the. He was a dairy farmer. The rest of my family didn't milk cows. So my dad, when he was 14, the neighbor up the road needed to go away for a weekend and asked my dad to milk cows for him. So he went down the road and a mile or so, and he milked those cows, and he just fell in love with it. His his father and his grandfather had beef cattle and sheep and hogs, and so he just really liked milking cows, and got out of high school. Married my mom 2 weeks after they got out of high school, and then they started milking cows that fall. And so that would have been in the early 70s. And they built a farm, and then the 80s farm crisis happened, and he was, like they said, last in, first out was kind of what happened, and he lost his farm in that early
Can
80s.
I guess before moving on, can you just talk a little bit about the 80s farm crisis?
Sure. The 70s were a very unique time in the history of agriculture in that we went off the gold standard with Nixon. Uh, everybody says government treasuries are the most secure investment out there because the government will never default. Well, the government did default in the 70s because France wanted their gold, and we didn't have it to give to them. So we went off the gold standard and told them we'll give you money instead. And the petrodollar came around, and all those economic and political and global affairs were going on. And because we didn't have any true value attached to our dollar anymore, um, the dollar just took off, started to lose its value. Therefore, prices inflated, and so you had huge run ups in prices of grains, commodities that nobody had ever seen before. And it was all boom. There was never going to be an end to the prosperity that was in agriculture in the 70s, and everybody was making money. And then uh, that inflation was going through the general economy, and people were getting squeezed that were the consumers. They couldn't afford to buy food. The gas lines of the 70s. Fuel had gone from 25 cents a gallon in the early 70s or less to nearly a dollar. And we think of a dollar of gasoline as pretty cheap, but if it goes up four times the value in a few years, you get strained by that. And the same thing happened in all the commodities. Corn for most of the 60s was in the sub dollar or right around a dollar a bushel, and all of a sudden corn is $3 a bushel. And uh, lots of unique things happened there. Milk was $3 to $4 a hundred in the early 60s, and by the mid 70s it's $12 a hundred. So there was just this astronomical increase in the value of the commodities, and all of a sudden, because of the political pressure, and the turmoil of the politics of that time. Nixon, of course, being resigning, nearly being impeached. Gerald Ford comes into office, and he's got a lot of cultural tumult around him. He starts the Win campaign. It was whip inflation now, and he starts to do all these things. They put on price controls, and we think there's a lot of government involvement now. Government's heavy hand was really involved in what was going on in the economics of the average person at that time. And to get everything under control, um, Paul Volcker was elected to be the Federal Reserve, and he came in actually at the end of Jimmy Carter's term, and then he accelerated his program under Ronald Reagan, and that was basically, we're going to raise interest rates high enough to slow the economy down, slow down borrowing, slow down spending, and then we can get inflation under control and get these runaway prices. Well, if you had interest had been low, so pretty much everybody had a variable rate mortgage in agriculture at that time, especially if you had an FHA or a farm credit loan. That was about all you could really get. And so you had an interest rate of 8%, let's say in 1979. By 1981, it was 13%, and by 1983, it was 18%. And and at the same time, the value of your product was going down while your expenses were were just going right through the roof. So it caught everybody, and if you had any equity, and my dad had a little equity in his operation, Farmers Home was after you. We're going to close you out because that can make our books look good. And the other side of that was, as the Federal Reserve was raising interest rates, they were also constraining and putting restraints on lending. So the banks were being forced to clean up their roles, so to say, so that they could keep their charters. And it was just the perfect storm. And if you were caught in that, you were out. You didn't. I mean, it wasn't. I know in my dad's case, it was like 90 days from the time he got his first letter that you were in default to we were off.
Yeah.
We moved off the farm. So that was in 1981 that my dad lost the farm, and saw the good, the bad, the ugly of family life through that. Dad was really depressed, um, but I think his faith played a big role in bringing him back around. And took him about a year, and he said, I still want to farm. I'm going to figure out a way to get back into farming. So he went and he worked for a dairy farmer for 3 years, saved up some money, and made a deal with this older gentleman. He was in his, at that time, mid to late 70s, no family coming back to the farm. So he started buying cows from him. They worked out a deal where there was a partnership. And he did that for 3 more years. And in 1988, he went off on his own, rented a farm for a couple of years. And then in 90, he bought his first farm back again. So I give my dad a lot of credit because he didn't quit. He just kept pushing on. And it gave him a unique perspective uh, on life that I don't think a lot of people did have. So he came back around, and I just love milking cows. I love working with my dad, and uh, so we just kept on going, and that was how I got started in farming. Was because he kept the dream going.
I'm curious then with your father, do you know what kept him wanting to farm? Especially going through that, I mean, that had to be crazy turmoil and stress and whatnot.
Well, I think he just had a genuine love for animals and the land, and didn't want to go and work for somebody else in a 9 to 5, um, you know, just an office environment. My dad, like I said, he got married 2 weeks out of high school, didn't have a college education, extremely intelligent man, well read. Uh, I'd put him up against anybody with a PhD. But so he didn't have those credentials to go and do anything but like a factory job or some kind of trade. And my dad's a very good farmer, but between the two of us, he was not the mechanical one. He was good with cattle. So uh, I remember when I was about 16, we were remodeling a room in our house, and my mom basically told him, "You need to stop and let Jr. do this because Jr.'s better at it than you are." And he was happy to go out and milk cows, and I was happy to stay in the house and build this room. That was just the difference between the two of us, and
Yeah.
those skills complemented each other well going forward. But he's stubborn. Uh, there's times that's really good, and there was times where he and I would butt heads because he just could not see that I would be right, and I got a little bit of his stubborn streak as well. So, so that was how he just said, "I am not going to quit," and he didn't.
Well, I love how you said that he then started working for a dairy farmer and then eventually, slowly but surely, made a deal with him. Because that's one thing that I really want to try to, I guess, bring those type of conversations moving forward is that the fact that the average age of the farmer continues to get higher and most don't have an heir. And
Mm-hmm.
the younger generations aren't getting into agriculture. But if we can talk more, I mean, this is why I have the podcast and everything for Regenaissance is to build these conversations and drive that so people can be interested, potentially visit a farm, volunteer, work on one, and who knows where that might lead to where hell you could even end up being the heir for that next farm.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's just a cool example to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm curious then, going back to just growing up on the farm with your father, what are some of your earliest childhood memories?
Well, I'll say it like this: the first memory I have of milking cows, I was 5 years old, and my dad had a something with his back. I don't remember exactly what it was, but he had to go in for a surgery, and it was going to be a couple of days of. It wasn't major or anything, but something had to be done, and uh, so he was gone. He couldn't lift anything. He couldn't walk. He was kind of bedridden for a couple of days, and they were milking. So this would have been 1977, probably. I'm going to guess, and they were milking about 30 cows at the time, which was about an average size farm then. And an old setup that he was renting. He bought the farm that he lost the next year. So that was 78 when he bought his first dairy farm. So he was renting this farm. It was an old, I mean, really old now, but at the time, even then, it was old. It didn't have a pipeline that you milked the cows in. This was a stanchion barn. The cows stayed there and they ate there, and you moved the milkers to them. So they had what they called was an old milk conveyor system, and it was like a small stainless steel container that had a big hose on it that ran to your bulk tank. And you move that down, and you had these big buckets. You've seen those surge buckets that they would hang a strap on the cow, and that's how they milked the cows then. And so my mom and I, for three milkings, we milked the cows with those. Now my mom was not a big person. She's 5'6" at that time, maybe 120 pounds, and I'm 5. So we made a little stool, and we would pick these buckets up, and we would dump them in the milk conveyor to run the milk to the bulk tank. And that's one of my early memories of milking cows. Another really cool memory I have is my dad was baling hay about probably that same year, I would say, or maybe a year later, and he had an international tractor that we were running the baler. It had a cab on it, and I was riding with him because you know that's what little boys on the farm do. And we had the tractor playing, or the radio playing in the tractor, and I can remember him always listening to WGN out of Chicago and Orion Samuelson and Max Armstrong, and I can remember listening to that, and then when they got done, we would listen to the White Sox playing baseball
Hmm.
and bale hay. You know, he had a kicker wagon, so he was driving and filling the wagons. And he'd fill the wagons, three or four that he had, and then the next morning he would unload them. And I was a little guy, but I would get up on top and push the bales down to him, and just uh, wonderful memories like that of farming with him. And I had the chance to later in life. My grandpa had moved out of the state, and he moved back in '94. And so for a couple of years there, um, Grandpa helped us on the farm. He didn't own the farm or anything, but he helped us. And for a while there, it was three generations of us doing stuff together. And uh, we were one year we had to buy some feed from a neighbor, haylage out of a silo, and so we had a single axle dump truck, and we hauled a wagon behind that to haul his hay back and forth from because we were feeding a lot of cattle, so we took a lot of hay every day or a lot of haylage. And I was pulling this wagon, and I had a spindle, the thing the wheel hooks to, broke off, and we couldn't jack it up because it was a dirt road and the ground was soft and it was hard to lift the wagon. So my dad, my grandpa at that time is probably 68, and my dad there's exactly 20 years between me, my dad, and my grandpa. So my dad's 68, my dad's 48, and I'm 28, and we're all in this wagon pitching it out of this haylage into the wagon that we pulled up next to it so we could pick this wagon up. And we're in there and we're laughing and having a good time, just enjoying working together. And the neighbor, the guy across the street from where we broke down, we happen to know who he was, but he sat outside that wagon for like a half an hour listening to us telling jokes and laughing and throwing hay at each other. And he climbs up over the wagon. He says, "You guys are absolutely insane." And I says, "Why is that?" And his name was Ray. I go, "Ray, what's the matter?" I says, "You don't ever see anybody enjoy working?" He goes, "No." He goes, "This is unreal." He says, "I'd be on the ground bawling because I had to do this." And so that to me is really family farming. We just enjoyed that. And hey, we had our hard times too, where we would stand out behind the barn and cuss each other out. But I'll never forget those times.
I relate to that heavily because the farm I worked on, the owner was incredible, and then the main farmhand was incredible too. And so, just those type of experiences, I just remember being out in the land, especially if cows got out and whatnot. It was it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Because I mean, my most fond memory of when I worked on the farm ended up being it was when the cows got out, and it was a Saturday. No one was on the farm, and so I went back to the farm just to get something because that was pretty much the only evening that we had free time. And then when I came back, they were in the complete opposite direction of where they were supposed to be at. And then that was one of the only times that the farm owner and his family had free time. So I didn't contact him, but I contacted the farm hand.
Mhm.
He was in the parking lot about to get sushi with his girlfriend, so he had to come back, and we just had to figure out how to get these cows back. And I completely had to. I didn't do anything Saturday night, but that ended up being my most fond memory of stuff like that. It was the most unexpected thing and
Yeah.
covered in mud and whatnot, but we had a blast. So yeah, it's cool how that having a good team, whether it be actual family or the team I had on that farm, can be such a.
Mhm.
I mean, just with any team, because obviously, whenever I worked at IBM, having a good team makes it all the difference. But
Yeah.
especially with your family too, so that's really cool to hear.
Yeah. Yep.
So I guess moving forward, then, going just on the topic of dairy, because I mean that's what you've been doing too. What exactly about milking cows and just that whole world that you've enjoyed so much throughout your whole lifetime?
Well, it's the it's the every aspect of what you do with a dairy cow gives you an immediate result. If you're treating your cattle right, it shows up today in the bulk tank. It's of all of the things that you do in agriculture, it's the fastest return on and feedback on the information on what you're doing. So you may have a great idea. I'm going to change the feed setup. I'm going to manage the cows different in this way. And you go in 2 days, man, this isn't working. The cows aren't producing as much milk, and that was a great idea on paper, but it's not working in the real world. And you can really see that. Whereas, like if you plant a corn crop and you say, I'm going to try a different hybrid this year or a different method of farming. You really don't know the results until harvest that fall. You can look at some things, but you can't change anything about it. The die is set. You're cast. And so when you uh, milk cows, you know right away, hey, this is working. That's not working. So that's one of the things I enjoy. The next thing I enjoy about it is the complete life cycle of the cow. Um, you raise the heifer. You raise that little baby female calf, and how you do raising her as a small animal up through all the stages of growth to the breeding age, and then bringing her into the parlor. All that affects what her end result is going to be, and that's a you thing. You really can dictate her environment, her abilities, and so you get you get you get that absolute feedback of how well you're doing as a dairy farmer immediately. You sit there and you can look over all the different bull proofs and you can say, hey, I'm going to go with these bulls, and you hope and you look at everything in the genetic mating of them and you think, hey, this is what I'm going to end up with. And then you get there and you find out nature has a way of saying, haha, fooled you. And you go, man, that didn't work. And you go, okay, I guess I'll not do that again, or I'll tweak it in some way. And so those are the things. But I enjoy delivering calves and seeing that newborn calf with that mom, and the satisfaction of knowing, hey, I put up high quality feed, and it's showing forward right now in these cows and how they produce it. And it's to me, it's just in all of agriculture, it's the most responsive to your management of anything out there, and that's one of the things I love about it.
And now, going back a little bit to your upbringing too with your father, was that dairy, was it raw dairy or was it for pasteurization?
Yeah, we were commercial dairymen, sold to a traditional milk co-op, uh, all up until he had a basically the top of his heart blew off is what happened to him,
Holy
and
smokes.
he collapsed on the floor. My wife happened to be here and was able to call 911. We were able to get him life flighted to a hospital. They were able to repair his heart, and he's with us today, but he's obviously not able to do a lot anymore. Uh, that was in 2017. So I took over the farm in 2018 from him completely. Uh, and I continued to sell to DFA, our dairy co op, until 2022 when we had a falling out and I no longer did that. So, yeah.
So on the topic of just the commercial dairy, then what's that process like? Um, yeah, because now I'm thinking about it, I don't actually haven't really talked to somebody about that whole process.
So, uh, eh, most dairy farmers sell to uh, a co-op, which is a milk pooling association. So, group of farmers. Um, the co-op can be about any size, but now we've reduced our numbers so much that Uh, DFA is the largest one. You have Foremost, you have Prairie Farms, AMPI, and a few others, and then some smaller regional co-ops. But basically, they act as an agent of collecting the milk. What the original idea of a co-op was they were going to act as an agent to pool the members' milk to get the best price through volume and to be able to service larger accounts, especially going into the fluid milk process. So when you sell milk to a co-op, you don't get the price for what its end use is. You get what's called the blend price. So there's four classes of milk in the United States. Class one is fluid milk, which is your typically your highest value. Class two is your sour cream, your yogurt, ice cream, stuff like that. Class three is butter and cheese, and then class four is non-fat dry milk, basically. So powdered milk. And in your the way that we've set it up in the United States is we have what's called federal milk marketing orders, and you produce milk in a certain order. So here in Missouri, where I'm at, Southern Iowa, we're Federal Order 32, and they take the total production in that marketing order, and then they divide it by the percentages of milk used in each class, and then you get a formulated price for your milk. So I couldn't honestly, because I'm not in that market anymore. I couldn't tell you what that price is today because it doesn't matter to me anymore. But so it's typically right now it's running around $20 to $22 a hundred, something like that. Maybe it's a little lower than that right now, but that's how a co-op works, and it's supposed to be for the betterment of all the cooperative members that own a stake in it. The co-ops have gotten so big now they've become a business unto themselves, and now you largely have a group of people running them who are looking to profit as the managers, uh, as the brand entities of the co-ops. Because now co-ops used to be the co-op didn't really have a brand, but now a lot of them um, own their own brand as a wholly owned subsidiary. Is usually what they do. So, like when DFA bought Dean's, they used all of the members' equity as collateral for it to put up for the financing of it. But then they set it up as a wholly owned subsidiary. So now all the profits go to Dean's, and the farmer still has the financial burden if they go broke. So it's a really convoluted system how things have happened, and that's really simplifying it. You know, if some lawyer got on here, he could nitpick that, but that's simplifying it to down to its when you're sitting in the cheap seats when we were buying Dean's, and I was said, well, if they make a profit, who gets the money? They said, well, Dean's does, and I said, that's really weird because we put up the collateral. So why doesn't the returns, if there's any returns, come back to us? Well, that's just not how it works. Kept coming back. That's just not how, because they're a wholly owned. And I was like, wholly owned by who? You know, and so that's basically how the cooperative system works now in the United States in handling milk.
So it sounds like through that too, it just completely squeezed the dairy farmers.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, and it squeezed out the small co-ops too because when NAFTA was enacted in the late 90s, especially the Uruguay round, which came a little later, I think, uh, we moved from being a very domesticated milk. Milk is highly perishable, you know, so you have to either put it in a jug right away, or you have to put it into a storable product of butter, cheese, of dry powder, sour cream, something. And even the sour cream, the ice cream, those things have a short shelf life. You don't store them for 2 or 3 years. Um, so a lot of our co-ops were very domestically focused, which I thought was a great thing. We were feeding Americans American food. When NAFTA became available, we dropped our trade barriers, and suddenly our now trading partners could bring in cheaper product to replace our product. And so we were looking at, we couldn't do it cheaper, but we could do larger volumes. So America has always been big. We do things big. We don't build a railroad that goes 100 miles. We build a railroad that goes from one sea to the other sea. Um, so because we do everything big, we always think in mass volume. And when uh, when NAFTA came around, our only trading, we had quality, but we were high priced. But we could say, but we can send you thousands of tons of non-fat dry milk that you can reconstitute into making whatever product you want to in Asia, North Africa, South America, you name the place. And uh, that really changed how co-ops had to handle their milk. And if you weren't set up to get into the international markets, you were basically gobbled up by those that could. And suddenly, um, that international market ran the price of milk, and that's really what changed in the cooperative structure of the U.S. and the dairy farming. And so, along with that, so when I started, I actually started. I bought my first cows in 1991. I still had a year left of college, but I was able to commute back and forth. So when I started, there was 130 some thousand dairy farms in the United States. The last numbers I've seen, most recently, um, we're down to around 27,000 is what's left. And you saw a very rapid destruction of those numbers from about 98 to 2009. Uh, that 11-year period, I think, I think it was close to 80,000 farms were decimated in that time period.
What in particular caused that during that time?
Well, I think a lot of it was the opening of the trade barriers that allowed um, other milk products to come into the United States. Our
See,
cheese,
that's even so. Just before that too. So there was at that time, all of a sudden, there was a lot of milk products coming in from around the world.
yeah, New Zealand was huge, 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 huge importer of milk. Became New Zealand because they were the low cost um, dairy producer in the world at that time. Because New Zealand is a very unique environment. A lot of our regenerative stuff that we talk about in terms of grass management comes out of New Zealand, and
Yeah.
because they're so good at it, but they have a unique environment that we don't. I mean, we aren't surrounded by oceans, and we don't have that constant temperature. So to try to replicate that here can be difficult in terms of grass management. But a lot of their ideas are very sound, and I try to try to um, implement them. So New Zealand came on as this low cost milk producer, and what we did, our multinational cheese manufacturers in particular, were able to take a component called milk protein concentrate, and they started to import that, and they used that in cheese to bolster the yield of cheese. So it used to be everybody figured you'd get 1 pound of cheese from 10 pounds of milk. That was the old formula. It did depend on the cheese, but that was roughly where it was. Well, you started importing this milk protein concentrate, and you could get a pound of cheese out of 8 pounds. So you had 20% more efficiency, but you also then had to figure out what to do with that extra milk that you weren't putting into cheese now. So things like that, through those free trade agreements, and there was other things as well. That's just one example. They opened the floodgates, and then you got into ultra high pasteurized milk. You got into more processing. All of those things took away from our quality and moved it into food service, just mass production. And uh, and all of that happened in that late '90s, early 2000s. And if you weren't a low cost producer or had access to volume discounts through how big your farm was, you couldn't make it anymore. And that culminated in 2009 with a horrific. The milk price just dropped right out of sight. And I was actually, when I started milking cows in '91, I was getting about $12 to $13 a hundred for milk, and in 2009 we were getting $8 a hundred. So it was just it didn't matter what you did, you lost money every day just looking at the cows.
So I was gonna, yeah, I guess so. During that time, then how were you able to manage through that time period?
Well, that was where our stubbornness came in, and you you just fixed what you could fix. You were you were cash poor, and you just fought every day to keep moving. Fortunately, at that time, we were farming a little bit of ground, and so we had some cash crop corn income, and those were good years to be selling corn. So we were kind of supporting the dairy with uh, cash crop sales, but it wasn't enough to. I mean, it kept us afloat, but it didn't make us rich. Yeah.
And now, too, just on the whole topic of dairy, too, because now, and then you mentioned like the ultra high pasteurization. I guess from like the culture standpoint, for all of the dairy farmers, were they pushing for just like heavy pasteurization, like the ultra high temps, essentially like what Fairlife is now? Were they trying to push that message to you guys too? Then,
Um, well, I don't know if they were pushing it on farmers so much as they were pushing it on the public.
yeah,
And so, and they're doing that. My opinion here, okay, they're doing that so that they can continue to um, take away the uniqueness of milk and make it a sports drink, make it a ready to go meal, or fluid drink. One of the interesting things, I think it was 3 years ago now, down in Mississippi, um, they the last Borden's bottling plant in that region closed, and so all of the milk was getting shipped in from like Dallas, Texas, Kansas City, Missouri, long distances, and it was very expensive because refrigerator trucks have to haul milk from the processing plant. You have to get it there in a very timely manner so that it can sit on the shelf for a couple days before the expiration date happens. And they closed that plant down sometime in early summer. And as school was getting closer, the schools started to say, "Hey, what are we going to do for milk? Because we don't have a local source for milk anymore." So the major processors like Dean's and Highland and these types of people came together and said, "Hey, we'll get you milk, but it's going to have to be ultra high temperature pasteurized." And it became a problem for the schools because they also said then, "Hey, we can bring you a semi-load lot. It's going to be a lot cheaper per carton. It's going to save you money, but you have to store a semi-load lot." Well, they were not in any way, shape or form set up to do that. So some of the schools actually built temporary storage so that they could just a building, a temporary building that they could stick this these pallets of ultra high temperature processed milk in, so that they would have milk, and then they would bring it in a couple days before, chill it, and then the kids would drink it. And you think about that, you think, how good of a product is that they can store it outside in this temporary shed that's just out of the weather but not really climate controlled, and then bring it in, and it could be several months after the day it was made at the farm. And so that's why they're pushing that, is it gives them uh, extra storage possibilities. It gives them less need to be um, just in time deliveries and that type of thing. You know, milk is, I think, one of them things that connects us to the reality of time. Not everything lasts forever. It goes bad, and it has a peak quality and a peak time to be consumed. And you know, fresh milk, there's nothing like it. It's just delicious, and uh, and we just love giving it to our customers because it's immediate satisfaction.
I love on the topic of the time too, because that to me, I say that the root of like our health problems is disconnection from our food, but I think it's the root of a majority of our problems because, like on the topic of time, agriculture forces you to think long term.
Hmm.
And so whenever a consumer, again, they go to the grocery store, expect to find strawberries and blueberries and whatever year round, expect it to be fully stocked year round, go in there and there's no farmers and ranchers to talk to. You can't see the farmer ranch. And so that's just out of sight, out of mind.
Hmm.
And then just in the culture, how we're at culturally now, we expect everything immediately. We cheat. We try to cheat the system. If we're overweight, we try to take a pill called Ozempic.
Hmm.
And so that's another reason why I try to tell people to go to a farm or ranch is because not only does it transform your thinking with food and your relationship with your food and the land and where it comes from, therefore the earth, but also time. And yeah, I don't know. It's just interesting how much you can learn from growing up and raising a family on a farm, but also just going to a farm and talking to the owner. That's why
Hmm.
I even posted yesterday um, on Twitter. I forgot it was something like "Trad Life this buy some land that have you actually ever visited a farm and talked to the owner? Have you shook the hand that feeds you?" Because
Yep.
it's cool that people are starting to wake up, and it's cool that people are thinking about getting land or whatnot. If you've never farmed in your life, you're gonna have this sensationalized viewpoint that so many people have of
Hmm.
farming because it's an entirely different lifestyle.
Hmm. You know, on that, Ryan, I think the other side of that is, I think more farmers need to talk to consumers too.
And that's where I'm trying to come in with Renaissance is exactly that. Is I noticed that a lot of farmers silo themselves out from the consumers too,
Yep.
and it makes sense too. Whenever I mean, how fast society advanced with technology,
Hmm.
because I think I forgot Moore's law is how fast it advances every year and a half, and
Yeah.
so technology just skyrocketed. I mean,
Yep.
with AI, it's only 3 years old, and now
Yeah.
you can watch videos, and to me, there's some parts where it's like, wow, that looked 100% real.
Yep.
And so when you take an industry like farming to where it's super old school, you're out in the land and not a lot of Wi-Fi,
Hmm.
and then you tell them to try to integrate through all that, it's tough. And so that's why I try to get consumers to tell them to have an open ear too and be patient, because that's one thing that I've noticed right now is people are waking up and becoming aware, but then they close their minds still. Like they learn a little bit about it and they're like, all right, I know everything, and so now I can just
Hmm.
now I feel good. And so but they've never still again talked to a farmer and
Hmm. Hmm.
heard their all the stories. That's why I go so story focused too. Is
Hmm.
just sit down and listen to some of the stories they have to share because it will open up your minds and eyes like crazy,
Hmm.
and hearts too. That's the most important part. Is I'm kind of rambling all over the place, but
It's good. Yeah. Yep.
with our food, it's just how we've been able to advance so far as technology is because food, and
Yeah.
and that's just why it's so mind-boggling to me
Hmm.
where we're at as always call it soy society because I still believe we live in a soy society, not society at
Yeah.
all.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so I'm just gonna leave it at that. It's just interesting how
Well, you know.
technology is. Well, I guess the last thing I want to add, it's just crazy how the fact that technology is so advanced to where I'm talking to you and found you through Twitter and all of this, but yet uh, we we live inside so much. We don't go outside, and
Hmm.
that's another reason why I tell people to go outside is or to go to ranches to get outside. Whenever I worked on the farm and was outside all day, I literally was doing backbreaking work. I was sitting on a bin, hand grabbing peas and all of that.
Hmm.
but I was outside the whole entire day, and
Hmm. Yeah.
it's hard to describe unless you experience it yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and uh, the journey that we've been on since 2022, because we were a commercial dairyman. I was milking 70 cows. I was doing I was doing everything that the conventional farmer does, and I didn't have the exact same mindset, but I also had some of those same perceptions of the consumer. And and you in agriculture we become defensive, like, because our identity is in what we produce. And so when somebody attacks a farming practice, you feel attacked.
Oh yeah.
Like, I'm not trying to kill you, I'm
Yeah,
you know
absolutely. And
it,
that's where I try to come from the consumers is trying to get them to understand because it's just like you're telling somebody that they were raised into this world in the agriculture and were told from most likely their not just their dad but their grandfather like you mentioned. B they've been farming. I mean, your earliest memory is at 5, and so take that and say maybe you're 40. That's 40 years of farming, and so you have somebody in some city that's never worked on a farm telling you all these things. I would be pissed off and defensive too,
yeah,
and so that's why I'm trying to get at. We have to be collaborative. This whole effort has to be collaborative for it to work. If we want to change the system, but also actually be supportive of one another through that, or else I don't think the changes are ever going to happen.
yeah, yeah. And it's good for us also to, I think in agriculture we do silo ourselves off, and we don't challenge ourselves. We don't ever ask the why question at a meta level. We might ask why are we planting this hybrid? Why are we breeding this bull? Why are we doing this management practice? But why are we producing food? Why are we you know these big issues up here? And that's because we've been industrialized. We've been specialized. A good friend of mine, a couple of years ago, he said one of the things he says I like about you is you're not an insect. And I didn't know what that meant. I was like, well, yeah, I don't have 8 arms, 6 arms. What do you mean? And he says, well, insects only do one thing. He says, that an ant, a scout ant runs out, finds food, comes back, tells the people where the food is. All the other army of ants runs out, gets the food, brings it back to the queen, and that's all they do. He says you don't do that. You're not specialized. You can do this and you can do that. And I said, yeah, but I don't do any of those things really, you know, well. They're not a specialty of mine. He goes, yeah, but you do them all good enough. And I think that's a thing that we have lost in agriculture, is as we have specialized. I'm a corn farmer, I'm a pork producer, I'm a you name it. We lost our ability to be multi-focused, multi-talented.
That was just well. That's also just
Yeah.
culturally as a whole because we were told to. I mean, when you think about healthcare, you get as specialized as it gets,
Hmm.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
whenever you because that with I mean that's I guess the consequence of capitalism is you go for highest efficiency, and so then you turn into specializations like that.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
I'm interested then because you said you would do all the things from that a conventional dairy farmer would do. So I guess it would be nice to hear some of the things that I guess what is the life of a conventional dairy farmer for yourself,
Well,
like whenever you were doing it.
we were pushing for um, maximum production at the lowest cost. Okay, so uh, you were trying to keep your expenses down while not hurting feed consumption and reproduction of the animal and the general health of the animal. So you're trying to get 70 or 75 pounds of milk out of every cow every day as an average, and you're trying to implement what is the lowest cost feed. And so you're always looking at your ration and saying, okay, is corn the best thing to be feeding right now? Is soybean meal, is there a better soybean meal to be feeding, or a better protein source? Or how many DDGs am I going to add into the ration right now? Am I going to feed more hay or more corn silage? Um, so I was doing all those things. Of course, like I said, I went to college for dairy business management, and got a degree in that. And I could do all the nutrition and all the balancing and all the repro work. And so, my day, and we milked 70 cows. And I didn't have any kids at home at that time. My oldest was out of high school and, living life, or my youngest, excuse me. And my older three kids were all out of the house. So it was my wife and I. So I'd get up at 3:30 in the morning, go out, milk cows in my parlor. It took me about 2.5 hours to milk cows and clean up. Then I would go mix feed, feed the cattle, feed the dairy cows, scrape the barns. And I mean, I just ran from the minute I got up in the morning until 7:30 at night. You were just constant. And the only day I changed my routine was Sunday when we would go to church. I would stop a little earlier and I'd take a little bit of a nap in the afternoon. And it was 7 days a week otherwise. And raised all the calves, raised all the heifers, raised all of my own feed. So I was just and I enjoyed it. I wasn't burnt out by it. I mean, I enjoyed working hard. I was going on most nights 4 or 5 hours of sleep, and it just was what I did, and I didn't think anything of it. It wasn't. Other people would be like, "I just can't imagine you do that." I can't imagine not doing it. That's just the way it was. And I was a little bit different in that I've always been really skeptical of antibiotics. My dad really focused on preventative treatment for animals instead of intervention, uh, waiting until a disease had become a problem, and then so so I was not a big antibiotic guy. My vet, he if I called him, he was like, "Man, this is a train wreck. Why are you even calling me?" I go, "Well, we got to save this cow. Come on out. We have a C-section or something like that on the cow to do." And he was like, "I always hate it when you call because it's not going to be easy because you've already done all the easy stuff." And I said, "Yeah." And there towards the end, the vet got in a new partner, and she's a good vet, but she came and it really this was a story that really focused me on the changes in agriculture and how we're training people. But I had a cow that had been about 3 weeks post calving, and she was exhibiting signs of milk fever. And I had treated her for all that, but she wasn't responding. And so I was like, something else is going on here, and I don't know what it is. And so I had the vet. She came out, and I explained to her everything I had done, all the protocols, all the calcium, the CMPK I had given her, the different things. And I told her, I said, I've also given her a couple aspirin. And she looked at me and she said, "Why'd you do that?" And I said, "Well, when you're not feeling well, you take a couple aspirin." I just, I said, "We've done that. I mean, we've been doing that since the '70s. I mean, as long back as like." And she goes, "I have never heard of that before. I've been in vet school. I've been out of vet school for 2 years, and nobody has ever told me you could give a cow aspirin." And I just looked at her and I thought, "Why did I call you?" And but it's that change from working with the cow to making the cow work with the pharmaceuticals. And I've done all these things. She $300 later, I have a vet bill, and the cow was no better. And suddenly the cow snapped out of it and was fine. I to this day could not tell you what was the matter with her. But it just uh, integrated into me and reinforced to me how how important it was for me to be knowledgeable about things, because we've come to rely on experts so much that you get siloed in your experts as well. And so I said, "Man, I got to be proactive on these things." And it just made me more and more. So it didn't matter if it was in that. I'd always kind of farmed out all of my agronomy stuff to a crop consultant or the elevator guy or whatever you want to call him. And at that point in time, I was like, "All right, I got to get up to speed on all of this stuff. I gotta do a better job." And Uh,
Around what year was this?
that'd have been about 2020. When everybody's light bulbs were going off.
Yeah.
I mean, I was like inside a stadium with all the lights going on. I was like, I can't, I can't handle this much anymore. It was so much, so many things to look at differently than what I'd ever had to in the past. From that,
Is this also when you start, I guess, in terms of like raw dairy and switching to that, was this the impetus to all of that? And I
it
guess
was the
what led you?
beginning. It was the beginning of that. I was having so in 2020, DFA bought out Dean's, and I was really questioning what our co-op was doing, and I was bringing up a lot of questions, and I was getting a lot of pushback from our leadership.
What kind of questions?
Like the question I said, if we're putting up the capital, why aren't we getting the money back from them? Things like that. And then uh, how are we implemented a quota system in our co-op, so you could only produce so much milk, and if you produced over that, you got a deduct in your price for your milk. And I was like, as a cooperative, that's we've had cooperatives for 100 years in the United States. That's not been the model. Why are we doing this? This is a barrier of entry to new entrants into our into our system. That's not what we're about. And when I really needled everybody down about why we were doing it, it came down to it was what the employees wanted. And I said, that's not what co-ops are for. The co-ops are here for the farmer. Now, that doesn't mean the employees are slaves and that their concerns shouldn't be considered in all of that. But you're just trying to make it so you can manage your daily job, make it easier for you. Milk is a fluctuating commodity. It goes up and down by the day. Putting a quota on us just hurts us. It doesn't help everybody else. And then the way our structure in the United States is now, when you get to be so large, like let's say 2,000 cows, let's just use that number. I don't know exactly what the number is. Most of those guys are not involved directly in a co-op. They direct market, so they go around the co-op, and any fees or any costs that you would have with the co-op and the management of the co-op, they don't pay those, and they get the direct price for the milk of the blend price, obviously. And I was like, those guys aren't getting, so the big had no constraint on them. They could do whatever they wanted because they were going to still get the same price for their milk. And the small guy, he had to go along with the quota, otherwise he lost his market. And so these things were going on, and I was questioning them. I was like, we have lost our soul. I basically said. And fast forward to 2022, they came out and they were going to do an audit on the farm, which I had been going on for 20 some years and I'd never blinked an eye about. But they gave me all the paperwork. And because of COVID, because of all these other things, I was like, I need to read, I need to know what I'm signing. And I started reading through it and I was just appalled. And I was like, man, I don't agree with any of this stuff that's in here. And it was a lot of climate stuff in there about, they're asking you how much diesel fuel you used on the farm, and what was your fertilizer program, and herbicides, and do you vaccinate, and what vaccinations, and how often does your vet come out? And it became to be very intrusive questions to me.
Yep.
And it was written, this is what first set me off. It was written, do your employees have access to, whatever, MSDS, your safety data stuff, do your employees have access to emergency phone call numbers? And I was sitting there, I go, I don't have any employees. This isn't written for me. And so 2 weeks go by, and the field representative for the co-op, who was a great guy, know him well, he sits down and says, well, all right, well, sign here, sign here. And I was like, no, I got some questions. And I had a notebook there, and I had like 5 pages of questions for him because I was so pissed off about what this was. I didn't want to get angry at him, but I didn't want to get excited and lose what I wanted to say. So I started just reading him my questions. And the guy looks at me and he goes, nobody's asked me. Nope, I don't know what the answer. I'll have to get back to you on that. And it just didn't set right with me. And then we went out and we looked at all the cows, and he was like, "These your cows look great. I've always had cattle that have had access to pasture. In the winter, I keep them closed up in a barn, but in the summer, it wasn't really intensive grazing, but they had pasture they could get to." So we walk out in the pasture and we look everything over, and he, "Wow, your cows look great. You know, I really like how everything is here." He says, "This is the kind of farm I want to bring for an audit." And I said, "What do you mean by an audit?" I was like, he says, "Well, part of this deal is you could have a third party come and inspect your farm." And I said, "Well, who's the third party?" And he said, "Well, we don't know yet." And I was like, "Well, wait a second. I'm not opening up my farm to just anybody because I don't know what their agenda is. I don't know what they're trying to, we could have a bad day that day and a cow could break a leg or something. And that's the day they do the audit. And then suddenly I've got a black mark." I says, "I'm not doing that."
What's also just wild that he's just like a talking head. He's just like, "Will you perform the audit? I have no idea where, but that's what someone told me to tell you." Like,
Yeah. And so these things were going on, and I was like, "All right." I said, "Will you get back to me with your questions, with the answers to my questions, and we'll discuss this some more." So about 2 weeks later, he comes back, and I was really unsatisfied with his questions. And I said to him, I says, "This is a voluntary program, right?" I says, "The way I understand it, it's voluntary. It's put out by the National Milk Producers Federation, not mandated by any federal, bureaucracy. No, it's voluntary." I said, "Okay, well, I'll think about it." He comes back again. So now we're a month out. Now we're into late October. And he goes, "Well, what are you going to do?" I said, "I'm not going to sign it. I do not agree with this." I says, "You tell me it's voluntary. I have too many questions. I'm not going to sign it." And he goes, "Well, it's voluntary, but if you don't sign it, you can't sell your milk to us." And I looked at him and I go, "You have a very different definition of voluntary than I do." And he says, "Well,"
that's
he
like
says,
textbook, like cartoon villain
"Yeah,
like style.
yeah." And I says, "I don't understand." He says, "Well, we've made an agreement with our the people that we supply, so McDonald's, Cisco Foods, these big conglomerates, that all our farms would comply with these standards. And if you don't sign it, we don't have a record that you've complied." And I says, "So we're doing this for these guys." "Yeah." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, because they use it in their ESG score." And I had no idea what that was at the time. But I was like, "What's that?" He says, "Oh," he says, "it has something to do with carbon or something." And he says, "It's no big deal." And I was like, "That doesn't," and so all these terms and all this terminology is new to me. I don't know what it means. So I start researching that, and I was like, "No, I ain't going to be involved in this system." So I told him, I says, "I can't do this." And it just dawned on me about 2 days later that I had just ended my career in dairy farming because I didn't have any other options to go to another dairy co-op. That's one of the sad things about where we're at in agriculture right now is you have no possibility of dissent from the system. So like mandatory electronic ID that they're trying to push through. It's part of the USDA inspection. If you don't do it, you can't sell that cow. You've done nothing wrong. You've raised a good quality product that's good quality beef, but now you can't do anything with it because you don't fit their rules. And it was the same in the dairy industry. And I had no place for dissent. I had no place to go and voice my concern because everybody I talked to was like, "Just sign the paper, even though you don't mean it, even though you don't agree with it." And I was like, if I sign something, I want it to mean something. That's what honor and integrity is to me. And I said, "I can't sign it." So I told him I couldn't sign it. I became very depressed after that, and I did not handle that well. I just I didn't take care of the cows. I I had been through so much, fighting so many battles over the last decade before that. I was just done, and couldn't even get out of the bed in the morning. I mean, I was depressed. I was
Yeah.
clinical depression, and cows were not being cared for at all well. It was a bad time, and December, I believe the date was December 11th. My quality of my milk had dropped off quite a bit, and I wasn't meeting the standards that I needed to, which I'd always exceeded in the past. And they called me up and said, "We can't take your milk anymore. You got to get this straightened out." And I said, "Well, I don't want to sign those papers." And they said, "Well, you got till January 1st, but sell milk till January 1st." And I just didn't see any point in it. And that day, I went down to the local store and I grabbed a bottle and I went to the back of back in my pickup to the back of the farm and just looked. There's a big hill at the back of the farm, and I just overlooked everything and I just cried and drank. And I just was like, I have lost my dream. I have lost my dad's dream. I've lost my grandpa's. I've lost it all. And later that day, I came up and I took care of the cattle a little bit. Came in the house and went to sleep. The next day, my wife just got in my face, and she's just been my rock through this. And she said, "You have always been the guy that charged hell with a squirt gun. You never back down from a fight, good, bad, or indifferent." And she never liked that about. I mean, she was always like, "You will fight over anything," because you, and now you won't fight. And she goes, "I don't care. You got to fight for the cows. You got to fight for the farm." She said, "If you won't fight for anything else, you fight for me."
It's a
And
good
that just
woman.
that just resonated with me.
Yep.
And it took me about 2 or 3 weeks, and I was like, "Okay, I'm going to get a plan. I'm gonna." I had to have the ability to fight again, and then I started fighting. And so we switched over and we started. I says, and the co-op wasn't coming back, and I was like, "Screw you guys! If I'm going to fight, I'm not fighting you because that's a losing battle. You're a bureaucracy. You are the two-headed monster. I'll never know where to stop." So right after the first year, it came around to Christmas time, and all our kids were home, grandbabies and everything, and I apologized to them all because I had been pretty nasty to everybody in that time, and I was very specific. "Hey, your dad was an idiot," and looked at each one of them, and told them. And my oldest son, who's 6'4", I'm 5'9", so he just towers over me. He comes up and he gives me a big bear hug, and he says, "It's all right, Dad. We know you're a fighter. We know you're going to do it." And then my little granddaughter, who's like just about 2, she runs up and she just hugs on my leg, and I am just a big pile of pudding at this time.
Yep.
And the next day, I told my wife, "I don't know how we're going to do this. I got no plan. I have ruined my credit. I have ruined my cows, but we're going to get this back." And we just fought. And I got the bright idea to start selling raw milk directly to consumers, doing everything I had laughed at. As a commercial dairyman, I laughed at the people that did this. I was like, "No, those are fruitcakes and Fruit Loops. I ain't doing this." And I was like, "I'm going to become a fruitcake." And uh,
What do you remember? What specifically made you think about like specifically raw milk? I'm just
well,
curious about that.
in Missouri, we have a very lax law that allows for um, kind of easy distribution to directly to the customers. You can't sell into stores, you can't sell third party, but you can get to the consumers pretty easy. And I was seeing in 2022 this change in the consumer looking for, as you've noted, direct to farm paths to buy products, and this health and this concern about what's in our food. And I was like, "Hey, we can tap into that." And so I was like, "There's a path." I hadn't seen the path before, but I was like, "Okay, there's a direction we can go in here." And so we started to make a plan. I started to visit in southern Missouri. There's a lot more raw milk producers, so I started to visit a few farms down there. found out, hey, you can do this, you can't do this. Here's the workaround on this law, all these things. And I was just getting excited. But I also told my wife, I says, okay, if we're going to do this, we need to sell a premium product so we can get a premium price. So we tested all the cows that I had left. I'd sold a bunch to meet some bills and get things kind of squared away. Tested the cows that we had left to see if they had the A2 gene to have that more readily digestible milk, and found several that did and some that didn't. So we sold the ones that didn't, and we bought back cows that were confirmed A2. So I got rid of all my Holsteins that I loved, and I was buying in these little, we call them barn rats, little jerseys. And I had a college professor once. He says the only reason you own jerseys is because you're too proud to own goats. And so I was, I mean, I threw out everything that I knew, Ryan, and I just started over. And so we got this plan together and took some time because we wanted to do it right. So we sold our old bulk tank, bought a smaller bulk tank. We were getting coolers to keep our jugs in. And I was pricing out, glass versus plastic, and doing consumer research. My wife went to a Walmart. She asked a bunch of people questions about milk and milk quality. We were really trying to, hey, we're gonna be serious about this. And we made a plan that May 31st of 2023 we were going to start selling raw milk. And we had a tornado come through at the beginning of May and wiped our farm out. And so we had to put it off until July. All that was left was my milking parlor and my barn that housed the cows and our house. Every other machine shed, shop, heifer building, everything else was gone.
You said this was May 2023?
May 2023. Yep.
That's wild because, I mean, it's a little bit different, but that's why, because that's when I launched Regeneissance, but then my mom passed away on the same day. So in a sense too, I had a tornado just rip through right that. So that's wild timing, but
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
continue.
So we waited until July, and then we started selling milk to raw milk directly to the customers. And it has been an awesome ride. Um, we have we have been learning so much. We're still learning so much. You go from the average farmer makes a commodity and does a good job of it. And that's the extent of it. They deliver it somewhere and then they don't care about marketing. They don't care about it met the quality of the whatever conglomerate bought it. There's never any feedback to anybody. Was it good? Was it bad? Did it just met our test requirements? Good. And they're the minimum standard. So now, we're selling milk and people are like, this is awesome. We just love this. And then about 3 months in, we were still having a lot of supply chain issues that time period. And our sanitation supplier was held up and couldn't get us one of our sanitation products. So I had said, well, back when I was milking cows commercially, I would just go and get this off the shelf, and it worked. It killed all the bacteria. Didn't think anything of it. Did it, sent the milk out. Our phone just starts the next morning. Something's wrong with your milk. It doesn't taste good. And I'm like, we didn't do anything. And we start calling other customers. Have you tasted the milk? Because we thought, well, it's just one off. This person's kind of being picky or whatever. It was like the whole batch. And I was like, oh no, we can't. We're new at this. We can't have a bad name now. Well, what I had found out was we had switched on the advice of another raw milk producer, switched from a chlorine-based sanitizer to a hydrogen peroxide-based sanitizer. And the chlorine kind of sticks to the stainless steel a little bit, and it had given an off taste to the milk. So the milk was safe, it just didn't taste right. So we're faced with this big issue, like how do we keep our good name? So we just called up every customer, and we don't deliver directly to a home, we deliver to drop-off points, and then people come there and pick it up. And we called up everybody that had gotten that lot of milk, and we said, this is what happened. We were very honest with them, explained it all to them. we're getting our proper. I drove the 4 hours to the supplier, got the stuff that I needed, drove back. It's like I'm not doing that again. Rinsed everything, washed it all out, tested the milk the next day. Everything was fine. We told all of our customers we're going to deliver you replacement milk right to your door. And and most of them were like, "Oh, you don't have to do that. Wait till next week. We'll pick it up then or whatever." And but a few of them were like, "Yeah, we need your milk. We need it right now." So we dropped it off at their homes and learned a lot through that process about. As a farmer, I had never dealt with customer complaints. I that was just not something I was used to, and we got a lot of satisfaction out of that. I mean, it was a learning lesson. We wish it hadn't happened, but boy, it opened our eyes to these people want quality. They're discerning in their taste, and we want to be that source. We want to be it for years. So we're really careful about everything that we do. We're upfront and honest. We tell all of our customers anytime we've an open door policy to all of our customers. You want to come and see the farm, you're more than welcome anytime. And both Saturdays and Sundays, we'll have a family out here walking around, looking at stuff, and we obviously we walk along with them and answer any questions. But that's that has been so cool, and it's so neat to hear the discussion that they give to me and the questions that they ask. And I'm upfront and honest with them. They'll say some things, and I'll go, that's simply not true. I'll defend industrial agriculture because I'll be like, no, that's not true. People will say, are you against pasteurized milk? I'm like, no, I'm not against pasteurized milk. There's always going to be a big city somewhere that's going to have to be supplied. And that milk is going to have to go through a transportation process from a farm that's a greater distance away and then be stored on a shelf until you're ready. And you can't do that with my milk. So we've got to have that. But what I get frustrated by is the animosity between the two sides. We don't need that. I'm not against you. Don't be against me. I'm just because I'm doing something different. Don't let that challenge what you're doing or be if you sit there and go, well, he's just saying everything I'm doing bad. No, I'm not. I
Yeah.
understand that we've got to have a supermarket.
Yeah, it's crazy how in today's society that, I mean, everything's black and white, but
Mhm.
this really changed everything to where, I mean, we're tribal by nature, but this made like social media and all of that built that tribal in us tenfold because now, like you said, it's that, and that's also kind of why I've been trying to go at it from an educational standpoint. Is again, people will start learning a little bit of stuff, but then they start spewing this stuff because it's all or nothing,
Mhm.
and there's so much nuance in it all. I mean, even just like why pasteurization even happened.
Yeah.
Most people will just say a lot of babies were dying, people were dying. Sure, that was true,
Mhm.
but you completely missed the whole entire context of the industrial boom,
Yep.
how nasty the cities were, the type of quality of milk compared to rural America at the time. None of that is ever discussed.
Right.
But
I uh,
yeah,
I was asked to submit a testimony to our state house on a bill here recently about raw milk. I wasn't able to get down there to testify in person, so I wrote out a testimony. And I said, because the dairy industry in Missouri is actually very opposed to raw milk. So we've got this unique, and I know all these people because I was in their group. So when they hear my name, they're like, I know that guy. And when I
yeah,
hear their name, I know that guy. They've been on my farm. We have a relationship. Uh, we don't agree on everything, but we do at least know each other and have a relationship. So when I start to speak, that gives us a little bit of uh, a rapport with one another. And I said, one of the things that never is brought up as they bring about all these safety issues about raw milk, and they all go back to 1920, when babies were dying. And I'm like, two things have changed. And we talk about the rapid adoption of technology in agriculture, but then when we talk about it, we discount that it's here, and especially in food safety. I'm like, do you understand? In 1927, when the pasteurized milk ordinance was passed, 90% of the dairy farms in the United States didn't have electricity, let alone refrigeration.
Yep.
So, and can you tell me what semi was out on the road hauling milk in 1927? So we have to take that in context of what it was, and then we have to look at what we have now. Every farm has electricity that wants it. Every farm has refrigeration that wants it. And if you're selling raw milk, and this is where I get into my, I walk in two worlds here, and I get people in both of them pissed off at me. But I would talk to the homesteaders who are milking one cow, and great, you're milking it by hand in a bucket for your consumption. I'm all for you, 100%. Do it. But when you say I've got extra milk and I want to sell it, what's the quality of your milk at that point? It's not the same as what I'm doing. And you're usually selling it for, $3 a gallon because you're just hoping to help a little bit with your feed costs, And I'm like, you're not doing the industry, you're not doing your neighbors any service by doing that. And so I get the homesteaders upset with me. And like you said earlier, as we were talking, they have this Pollyannish view of agriculture where it's all good. And every January, and it happened this year in January, I'll have a couple of homesteaders that'll call me up. Hey, it's been really cold for several days. We're having trouble with our cow. We can't keep doing this. You have to do it every day. Or in the summertime, they'll call up and say, hey, I'm going away on vacation for 2 weeks. Will you take my cow and milk her for me for 2 weeks? And biosecurity is still an issue for me. So I said, no, I'm not going to take your cow. And what would I do with the milk? I don't know the quality of the milk. Is it A2, all those. I says, I can't do that. And in the winter, they call me and say, I want you to get my cow. I'm tired of her. And I'm like, well, has she been bred? No, but I've been milking her for a year and a half. And it's like, all right. And I'm just very blunt with them. I'm like, your cow, I know you saw on Facebook that these cows are selling for $3,500 a head. Your cow's not worth that. She's not bred back. She's dry and she's thin. She's a $500 cow. And then they're all upset with me. But I don't take the cow either because I'm not looking for problems. So, you have both sides of those worlds, and you have to walk them both. But I am dedicated to where we are right now. I am full into this. I enjoy being with the public now. I enjoy telling the story of milk. I enjoy having people come out to the farm, and I enjoy being the myth buster. That's and little kids come out and see the calves, and we also have pasture raised hogs that's an experiment I'm trying to get better at. And they see those little piglets running around, and they just, I mean, it's this is nature. This is real. And all they ever see is asphalt and concrete, and they live in a suburb, and maybe they have a dog, and it's just unique.
It is, absolutely. And it's interesting too, going back to talking with the commercial dairy farmers in Missouri too, because I mean, even when thinking about the late 1800s, when it was literally just horse and buggy, the streets were just filled of horse shit.
Yeah,
And so even just mentioning that
yeah,
with no sanitation, nothing, of course you're going to have rampant disease. Like
yeah,
it's,
yeah.
I don't get it at all, because all of that, literally all of that, is never discussed. The only point is talked about is milk was consumed, babies were dying, so therefore the milk is bad and raw milk should cease to exist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I'm curious too then, though, with them, do you think it's also potentially because taking away market share from them?
Oh, absolutely. Because it's not so much market share as it is um, when you sell an industrial product that has to be the same. And I fault our consumers for this. They want everything the same every day.
Yep.
Like you said earlier, you want to have bananas in January, you want to have blueberries in February, and
And they all have to look the same too. You have to
yeah,
go in, because that's the tough problem. It's such a tough problem because it is on the consumers, but also all of us were just literally raised into that. And so that's why I go back to the disconnection piece, because when I worked on the farm in Pennsylvania, man, they all looked like Franken tomatoes, but they were the best tomatoes I've ever had in my life by far.
Yep.
And I remember going into like a nearby store and then seeing their tomatoes, and they're all just shiny little red ones. And
Yep.
it's very hard to change whenever you're just accustomed to that your whole life.
Yeah. Yeah. And because of that industrial model, so anything that's an outlier of that, the industry doesn't want, because then they have something to be compared to. And
Mm,
if you don't have anything to compare to, so like, you know, in the pork industry, it's the other white meat. We started comparing pork to chicken. It was like, wait, they're not the same thing. Why are we doing that? But we were driven by this desire, and we raise them all the same, we feed them all the same, we do everything the same, so that when it gets to the processor to be harvested, it's the same. They're all the same weight, they fit on the belt the same, they fit on the hook the same, they cut the same. It's industrialized. There's no, and that takes all of the nature out of it and puts in all the industrialization. When I get my pigs and I say, okay, we're gonna take these four to the slaughter. One might be 320 pounds and one might be 260 pounds. There's barrows and there's gilts in there, and they cut different, and the meat's red. And people get it, go, this isn't pork. I'm like, no, this is pork. What you bought at the grocery store is Franken pork. And I'm like, this is not the same thing. And people, so you have to educate the consumer. It's just like with our raw milk. People get it, and we don't homogenize it, of course, so there's cream on the top. And every new customer, we have a little spiel that we go through. Hey, you put this in the refrigerator. When you get it out, you need to shake that up, get the cream to go through it. Why? I don't have to do that with any other milk. Right, because the other milk doesn't do that. It's and they say, and everybody asks me, I test my cows once a month for all the diseases and fat content, protein, and my bacteria tests. And I do it once a month because that's the easiest for me to do. I'd like to do it more often, but we it's expensive and we don't have an easy access to a lab to do it more than once a month. So I do it once a month. And they'll say to me, what's your fat content? Well, last month my fat content was 5.6%. Oh, well, that's way more um, than the store. Yeah, but this is good stuff. This is fat your body can digest, and you'll enjoy it. And uh, but I don't advertise. Actually, by law, I can't advertise that. So I had one lady. She was very upset. She was like, "Oh, that's very high fat content." And I says, "Actually, I says if you look at it another way, it's 94.4% fat free." And she was like, "What?" I said, "Yeah, 94.4% of it isn't." I says, "And store bought milk is 98% or 97% or 99% fat free, depending." He says, "Well, why don't they put that on there?" I says, "There's actually a law that says that dairy cannot put down how much fat free something is. On like you can buy a chicken breast and it'll say 95% fat free. You can't do that in dairy. So so the industrial model just doesn't want have anything to be compared to. It doesn't matter if it's in dairy or in eggs or in pork or in flour mill. It doesn't.
what you just brought up is just I mean, the most critical point of why I say shake your rancher's hand is in order to shift for our food, it just has to be a massive paradigm shift
Mhm.
from the consumers too to really understand it. And so having an actual relationship with a farmer or rancher gives you the ability to have these conversations to really understand it all. Because even with that, understanding certain laws and labels to why you can do this or can't do that is huge. Because I remember too, when I worked on the farm and doing farmers markets, our corn, like it wasn't a certified organic farm because he didn't want to pay for the labels, but we never used sprays,
Mhm.
no inputs or anything. It was completely 100% organic.
Mhm.
But then the neighbor to us to the left at the market sold corn, but it was conventional, and I think theirs were $2 cheaper than ours, and so consumers would always ask why, and they might not care all the time, but then there were some consumers that really did understand it all and want to support that. And so that's why I hope moving forward that that just continues to happen. It
Mhm.
has to happen.
Mhm.
Because neither side can silo themselves like they have been moving forward if we want to actually drive the change.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And we call ourselves. I coined the term. I farm. I'm a heritage farmer. That's people ask me. I says I farm the way my great grandpa did. But we don't spray our crops with chemicals. I do not vaccinate any animals. I think that the bigger issue in animal husbandry is going to be vaccinations going forward than it is antibiotics. So I don't vaccinate. If I have a cow that gets very ill, I will use an antibiotic to treat her because we have a lot of money invested in them. But again, like I said, I'm big on preventing issues
Yep.
before they get that far. And having a smaller herd of cattle, you know, I know I'm not when I was even when I was milking 70 cows, that doesn't sound like a lot, but for one guy,
It's a ton.
you're just pushing through. You're just pushing through, and so you
Yeah.
don't catch everything. But I can look at every cow every day. I can see, hey, well, she's got a watery eye today. She didn't have that yesterday, so I got to watch her closer, take her temp, figure out something. Um, so that gives me a little more um, opportunity to get ahead of things before I have to go to a super big intervention. But I don't use the organic label because, especially in dairy, it's been co-opted to mean something. People have one thing that it means, and I sit there and I go, "How can a 10,000 cow dairy in Colorado or Texas be organic?" I'm just sorry. How do you put 10,000 cows out on pasture and bring them back every twice a day to be milked or three times a day? I mean, the land mass would be so huge, and the travel time would be they'd never have any time to eat grass. So I really hate. I've become. I shouldn't use the word hate. I dislike that label because it hasn't been kept pure, and so uh, I'm very
Which is
open.
why conversations are so important, is because labels have been completely co-opted. Not just that. I mean, the label of origin, which is commonly talked about now.
Yep.
Yeah, it's all been co-opted, and even now regenerative too. That word,
Yep.
it's just the powerful people understand that too, and they try to use that to their advantage for marketing purposes.
Yeah. Yeah. You're exactly right. So I just enjoy being really honest with customers. They ask me the questions. I tell them the answers. We do raise our own non-GMO corn, so I don't plant any GMO corn. We're kind of doing a lot of experimenting this year, enjoying some different cropping things, and I'm going to plant some open pollinated corn just so I can see what it's like. I just want to try it, and uh, and that's one of the neat things about what I've done is I have freed myself from that industrial model, which says I've got to make this much money per unit of whatever, per cow, per acre, whatever. Now I'm like, I have to grow the best thing I can for the whole farm, and I get to look at things holistically. So I'm thinking about what corn I'm going to grow that's going to impact my cows, the growth of my pigs, the milk, the flavor of the milk, all those things. And I have renewed my love for agriculture because of what I've done. Because I have the freedom to do some things. Um,
And it
be-
reflects on Twitter too, which is cool because I mean I've been following you, and so
yeah,
uh, man, I wish we're gonna have to do a part two because there's a lot that there's so much more that we could talk about,
yeah,
but I have to actually end it at
yeah.
the end of this hour. So I guess to wrap it up, if there's any last things you'd like to share or where any listeners can find you.
hmm Well, we have check out our farm store. It's www.nourishingfamilyfarm.com. We've got under the About tab, I write a blog once a month so you can read some. I try to. I don't always get that done. Um, and then our Facebook page is Nourishing Family Farm. We put videos on there of our farm. But I'm really active on Twitter. JR's Cow Farm is who I am, and on Twitter, and look for me there. I enjoy the new ideas. I think one of the great things about Twitter is you can get out there and put out some new ideas, see how they're working, see what other people are doing, and find out that there's a lot of people out there pushing the envelope right now. And like I say, we're all farming, we're just doing it different. And and I really like that. And so those are the places you can find me. And of course, if you're ever in North Central Missouri, stop in. I normally, like I told one guy, says I'm not a shoot first, ask questions later kind of guy. So I'll let you in the door at least and talk.
Well, I love that. Well, thank you for joining today, JR.
Thanks a lot, Ryan. Appreciate your podcast.
Visit www.theregenaissance.co to learn more.